Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Wednesday, the 18th of February. I'm Caroline Hepke in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, Iran and the United States signal advances in nuclear talks, but the risk of military action remains.
Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi announces up to $36 billion of investments in the US as part of the country's trade deal with President Trump.
Plus, Ethiopia's example, how banning the import of fossil fuel cars has led to an increase in EV adoption.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Both the United States and Iran say talks on a nuclear deal are making progress, suggesting the chances of an imminent military clash are low. A US official has told Bloomberg that Tehran's diplomats are due to return to Geneva in 2 weeks with a new proposal. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says the path to a deal has started.
We are hopeful that negotiation will lead to a sustainable and negotiated solution. At the same time, as demonstrated during the aggression of 13 June 2025, Iran remains fully prepared to defend itself against any threat.
The Iranian Foreign Minister speaking in Geneva. A deal could mean the US lifting tough sanctions on Iran's oil industry and wider economy, but the next steps are expected to get more difficult, with each side needing to draft a text for a deal. US Vice President J.D. Vance told Fox News force was still an option.
You know, in some ways it went well. They agreed to meet afterwards. But in other ways, it was very clear that the president has set some red lines that the Iranians are not yet willing to actually acknowledge and work through. So we're going to keep on working it. But of course, the president reserves the ability to say when he thinks that diplomacy has reached its natural end. We hope we don't get to that point. But if we do, that'll be the president's call.
Vance and other US officials have talked up the prospect of strikes on Iran as the US has moved to arms and troops to the region. Oil prices fell on the signs of progress in the talks, but Brent crude is up almost 12% this year, largely because of the US-Iran tensions and the prospect of a war in the oil-rich region.
Now, Japan is planning to invest up to $36 billion in oil, gas and critical mineral projects in the US. It marks the first tranche of investments worth more than $500 billion in all as part of the trade deal that was struck between the two countries. In a social media post, President Trump hailed the scale of the projects, which include a large natural gas plant in Ohio and a crude export facility in the Gulf of Mexico. Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi said the initiatives aimed at building resilient supply chains and economic security. It comes weeks before Takaichi is set to meet with Trump in Washington.
The European Central Bank says Christine Lagarde hasn't made any decision about leaving her job as president early. That follows a report from the Financial Times citing one person familiar with Lagarde's thinking, saying she wants to step down before France's presidential election in April 2027. The statement from the ECB says the central bank chief is totally focused on her mission. There had been speculation that Lagarde may want to exit before the end of her 8-year term, which ends in October 2027. Here's what Lagarde told Bloomberg TV in November.
I was always under the impression that it was a 5-year term, and I hadn't checked. So having said yes to Macron and Merkel, I said, oh, okay, well, I'll be in Frankfurt for 5 years. And at that point, Macron said, no, for 8 years. But it was too late.
The ECB president there speaking to Bloomberg's leaders with L'Aqua last year. Earlier this week, we reported that European governments may choose to fast-track finding a successor for Lagarde to avoid having to deal with a possible far-right French president after next year's elections.
Anthropic is releasing a new AI model designed to be better at getting your computer to do complex tasks on your behalf. The new update to the company's Claude chatbot comes as AI fears continue to unsettle global markets. Some private software companies like McAfee have released their earnings ahead of time in a bid to try to reassure investors that they are resilient to disruption from this new technology. Although the firms declined to comment, their disclosure comes after a previous Anthropic product launch sparked a major sell-off.
Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway is shaking up its portfolio according to the latest regulatory filings. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the story.
When his firm first acquired shares in Amazon in 2019, Warren Buffett said he'd been an idiot for not buying the online retail giant stock sooner. But years later, it seems that sentiment could have shifted. Berkshire Hathaway slashed its investment in the company by more than 75% towards the end of last year, whilst also building its position in the New York Times. The move was one of Buffett's last bets as CEO of the famed conglomerate before stepping down. Berkshire also increased its stakes in Chevron and Chubb during the period. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Britain's Reform UK says that it plans to overhaul the Bank of England and the government's budget watchdog if it wins the next general election. In a speech later today, newly appointed Treasury spokesman Robert Jenrick is expected to say that the Office for Budget Responsibility needs more diversity of opinion when making economic forecasts. The Bank of England is also criticised for having green targets in addition to its focus on inflation. Here's Reform's business spokesman Richard Tice.
Get rid of the madness of what we've politely coined net stupid zero, which has been so damaging to our industrial competitiveness and so expensive for everybody at home.
Reform's Richard Tice there. In an interview with Bloomberg in January, Reform's leader, Nigel Farage, had vowed to, quote, challenge every single tenet of UK economic policy. And those are our top stories for you this morning. So in terms of the markets this hour, so we're thinking about the rotation that continued in stock markets yesterday in the US. It looked as if little had changed by the end of the day, but in fact, there were significant moves under the hood. Nasdaq futures this morning are up by 0.25%. US stocks 50 futures also gaining 0.3%. Very thin holiday trading in Asia, but Japanese stocks extending gains. The pound was hit hard yesterday. The dollar this morning is strengthening against all currency majors. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index up 0.1%. Fed officials saying that AI productivity and the boost that could bring could raise the neutral rate in terms of 10-year Treasury yields this hour. You've got 4.06, so yields rising just a fraction. And the crypto rout continues, Bitcoin trading just above $67,000. Those are the markets.
In a moment, more on the progress made in the US-Iran talks and what it means for the risk of military action, plus how Ethiopia's ban on importing fossil fuel cars has spurred a jump in electric vehicle use. But first, another story that we've been reading this morning on a trend of restaurants getting smaller. Kate Crader and Chris Rosa have been writing about this with examples from London, New York and beyond. They're the restaurateurs they spoke to, like the creators of Corner Store in New York or One Club Row in London, say that it's about creating a sense of exclusivity, but also the coziness and more familiarity with staff serving fewer people. It's also extending to hotels. Had you heard about the Dishoom Permit Room in Portobello? So Dishoom, obviously famous Italian or famous Indian restaurants all over the city of London. They have a 2-bedroom essentially apartment that you rent. It's designed to feel like a rich relative's guest house. But you know,
I love that.
Another brand going small. I always think every time I read one of Kate's articles, I end up with a list of places that I want to go. But this does actually speak to something that is really important to me, which is the acoustics in places, and can you hear the person that you're sitting opposite? There is an acceptable level of background noise where you want to hear a bit of a buzz, but you don't want it to be overwhelming. To me, a smaller venue makes that much easier.
Oh, yes, I sympathise. I mean, we use our ears so much every day, don't we? But yes, small venues, they almost feel necessary now, don't they? A kind of antidote to the digital world that we're all kind of immersed in. Smaller and what Kate calls bitsier rooms, which I like. What it means is that the rooms are smaller, but often in one venue you might get several rooms. And so there's a kind of depth of experience, a richness in the design that she says might bring authenticity. But then there's also, of course, the money. It's getting more expensive to build things. Everything is more expensive. Decor, hiring people, the food, the design, the lighting. So, of course, the trend is to teeny tiny.
Indeed. Well, we'll put a link to that piece in our podcast show notes. Well, let's bring you more now on the talks between the US and Iran. Officials say they made progress, suggesting the risk of military intervention has been averted or lessened, at least for now. Our head of Middle East, North Africa and Russia coverage, Stuart Livingston-Wallace, joins us now for more. Stuart, what do we know then about the progress that was made in these talks?
Yeah, good morning. So, I think both sides are taking it as a positive in the sense that they're still talking. The time frame seems to be that there will be a 2-week pause where they're going to come up with some actual proposals. They're going to swap drafts, see if they can come to, I suppose, a more formal working document. Now, the real question here is what exactly are the red lines for both sides? So the US has made it clear that it wants to talk about the nuclear file, which in itself is a pretty complex topic, but also wants to talk about missiles, wants to talk about the regional proxies that Iranian forces fund and provide with military supplies. On the Iranian side, they said they really only want to talk about the nuclear file, and within that, there are red lines around its right to enrich uranium at all. So we'll wait and see. And, the background to this is that there's a second strike carrier group making its way from the Caribbean to certainly the Indian Ocean, potentially the Persian Gulf. And that, again, builds this armada that Trump has spoken about repeatedly. So there is the threat there of military action in the background that I hope, and many people hope, are sort of focusing minds around getting some sort of resolution.
Yeah, indeed. Ahead of the talks, Iran said that it would close part of the Straits of Hormuz for military drills. And as you say, the US continuing to build up its military presence in the region. Should we expect to see more of that, of the kind of military tensions as the discussions progress?
Yeah, I think it's reasonable to expect it. Now, these were formal naval drills that had been pre-announced. I think it is unusual that they decided to close Hormuz for a couple of hours. But it's really a show of force. On top of that, you had this live missile fire going into Hormuz and into that strait, this very narrow strait, which I think carries something like a fifth of the world's seaborne oil. So really it's Iran trying to demonstrate that it still has some military capability. Again, when you stack that up against what's coming into the region, what's already in the region, or at least on the US side, it pales into insignificance, but nonetheless, it is Iran trying to show that it's not going to capitulate. Now, whether that's a reality that can actually carry out in the long term, that's really open to question. But you should anticipate more of this sort of action in the next several weeks.
Chris, there was another round of talks taking place in Geneva as well that you've also been keeping an eye on for us, Stuart. This is between Russia and Ukraine, the latest round of the US brokered peace talks. They're set to continue today. Are there any signs of progress in those negotiations?
No, not really much. Again, you can at least say, look, they're talking to each other. That in itself is progress. But really, this comes down to territory. And the Russians, insisting that Ukraine cede territory, the Ukrainians insisting they will not cede territory. And it's very hard to see how those two sides can come to any sort of agreement. So I don't think anyone was particularly optimistic going into this latest round of talks. They continue today, and that is a positive. But it's very hard to see how you navigate your way down those sort of two positions into something that can actually manifest itself into a lasting peace.
Yeah, so lots then for us to think about in terms of the negotiations that we saw yesterday. Those two regions of difficulty, not quite conflict in the Middle East, but certainly in Ukraine. Thank you so much, Stuart, for being with us. Stuart Livingston-Wallace joining us for discussions around that. Our head of Middle East, North Africa and Russia coverage. Thank you.
And those discussions due to recommence, according to the TASS news agency, this morning, 11 a.m. local time. According to the latest reporting this morning, we also had news that Ukraine's, the head of their peace negotiation team, Rustem Umerov, met with representatives of the US and their European partners following the trilateral talks in Geneva as well. Him talking in a social media post about the importance of maintaining a common vision and coordination of action between the US, Ukraine and Europe as well. So those talks set to continue today in Geneva over the issue of the future of Ukraine, of course, and whether or not an end can be brought to Russia's war there as we're approaching the 4th anniversary. And I would just point as well to the latest from our Bloomberg opinion columnist Mark Champion on this as well, talking about the US multitasking in the peace talks that we've seen in Geneva. So we have obviously the set of discussions with Iran, but also the set of discussions with Ukraine, both happening in Geneva yesterday. And the question of, I suppose, what the US motivations and strategy is in both of those sets of negotiations too of interest. So Bloomberg.com/opinion is where you'll find the latest writing from Mark Champion. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. Now, 2 years ago, Ethiopia banned the import of fossil fuel-powered vehicles and slashed tariffs on the import of electric cars. The result has been a far higher adoption of EVs compared to the global average. Our senior climate reporter and host of Bloomberg's Zero podcast, Akshat Rathi, is with us now for more. Akshat, good morning. How big has the change been in Ethiopia then in terms of electric vehicle adoption?
I mean, look, Ethiopia is a small economy, right? It's 130 million people, but only $1,000 per capita. So it's not a big car business. But what has happened is completely extraordinary and something other developing countries can look to. So within this 2-year period from when the ban was brought in, it has gone from an electric vehicle penetration of less than 1% to more than 6%. And that is higher than the global average of 4%. And of course, we know we've heard stories here in the West where countries are pushing really hard, like Norway now has 100% of all its new cars being electric. And yet that level of penetration to achieve it within a small 2-year window just shows what a leapfrog in car technology can look like if governments are serious about moving in that direction.
Yeah, and how has the country managed to do that and to overcome the obstacles that, loads of countries are thinking about, charging infrastructure for one?
Sometimes desperation gets you the answer. So Ethiopia suffered a sovereign debt default in 2023. And at the time, it was paying billions of dollars importing fuel and subsidizing it for its population. And it's just dollars it did not have that it could afford. And so it brought in this policy thinking, okay, well, if we have to import fuel and import cars, let's just import cars, because it turns out the country has been over the past decade or so building a huge amount of electricity resources, mostly renewables, some solar, some wind, but vastly the hydropower dam called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Nile. And that has made electricity really cheap and plentiful. So that combination of desperation and availability of cheap, clean power allowed it to take this policy and actually make it work inside.
Are there lessons from Ethiopia's experience for other countries that want to boost the adoption of EVs? I'm looking at, we have a story out of Poland this morning talking about the concerns there around security from Chinese-made electric cars. This is an active debate happening in many places.
Yeah, very much so. So I think 2 lessons here beyond the ones that we talked about, which is economics needs to make sense for your country and that you need to have plentiful electricity, ideally at very cheap prices. But the 2 things that Ethiopia can learn is it needed a charging network, which it hadn't built. So that is something other countries, as they look towards going electric, need to be clear about, that a charging network needs to be available for an adoption to happen quickly. On the security side, we are seeing a 2-split world where countries that are in the China orbit, China is the largest creditor to Ethiopia, do not really see the security concerns and are very happy to get these cheap, tech-heavy electric cars from China, which, many Western automakers can't even compete with. Whereas in Europe, yes, we are seeing this threat of China as a security issue, but that also means then Western automakers need to catch up to what is available in China, because it's not just producing cheap electric cars, it's also producing the techiest, the sexiest electric cars, ones that you can't get from Western automakers.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.